In a world where power often wears a familiar face, one man's quiet presence in the corner of the boardroom begins to unravel a web of secrets far darker than anyone imagined. His calm voice carries an accent that some use to dismiss him, his every move watched through a lens of prejudice and doubt. But beneath the surface lies a truth so profound it will shake the very foundations of a powerful company, exposing arrogance, cruelty, and betrayal in ways no one saw coming. This isn't just a story of one man's struggle. It's a reckoning that challenges everything we think we know about justice and identity. If you're ready for a story that unfolds with relentless tension and a twist that will leave you breathless, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from today? Join the conversation and let's dive into the truth together. Malachi Freeman had spent most of his life mastering silence. Silence in the face of scrutiny. Silence in the face of pity. Silence in the face of derision. He was the kind of man who noticed everything and said very little, knowing that words could be turned against him faster than a thrown knife. On his first day as CEO of Arcadia Holdings, he had felt the weight of his own footsteps in the long, carpeted hallway leading to the executive boardroom. He adjusted the cuff of his navy suit, nothing expensive, just carefully tailored to hide fraying seams, and tugged at the collar of his white shirt, which was ironed crisp, but had lost some color over years of wear. He was aware, always, of the missing finger on his left hand, lost to an industrial accident in his 20s. It was a badge of working-class grit to him, but to others it was a curiosity, a flaw to be noted and filed away. He had learned to keep that hand close to his side when he gestured and to fold it neatly on his lap when sitting. The burned scar on his neck was older still, pale and ridged where the skin had melted and healed wrong after a chemical fire. No one ever asked about it directly, but he could feel people's eyes flick toward it, the subtle recoil. Today, as he stepped into the boardroom, the light overhead caught the shiny skin and threw it into relief. He greeted the senior management team, each with their practiced smiles and stiff handshakes, a cadence of false courtesy. His accent, a legacy of years spent moving between countries as a boy, surfaced despite all his practice flattening it. He spoke carefully, hitting his consonants hard, but it was still there, a foreign rhythm he could not shed. The executives noted it. He could tell. They did not comment. Instead, they said things like, "Good to have you here," while refusing to meet his eyes for more than a second. He connected his laptop to the big screen, the company's logo illuminating the room in harsh white light. His presentation was polished. He'd spent weeks on it, poring over data until the numbers burned in his brain. As he spoke, he tried to modulate his voice to keep it calm and professional, but he heard it wobble once or twice. Each time, one of the managers shifted in their chair, lips twitching, gaze sliding to their neighbor as if to confirm they had noticed. When he clicked to the next slide, he heard someone exhale a short huff that might have been a laugh. He didn't pause. He kept going. When the presentation ended, the applause was polite but brief, the kind of clapping that dies before anyone can say it's obligatory. The floor opened for questions. There was silence at first. Then a senior VP leaned back and with affected thoughtfulness said the plan was ambitious, but maybe not entirely realistic given communication challenges. There was a beat before the others nodded, not adding anything themselves, but happy to let the critique hang in the air. Malachi swallowed hard and tried to answer, hearing the slight tremor in his voice. No one offered a follow-up. The meeting adjourned. The management team gathered their papers, avoided his gaze, and filed out in a cluster. He remained behind to disconnect his laptop, feeling the heat rising under his collar. Through the crack of the door, he could hear them in the hall, voices pitched low, but not low enough. Someone did an exaggerated version of his accented phrasing, dragging syllables into a heavy parody. Another barked a sharp laugh that turned quickly into coughing. He heard the muffled command to keep it down. He froze, knuckles white around the laptop. When he stepped onto the executive floor, the lights were bright and unflinching. He offered his careful greeting to the receptionist, his accent clipped but unmistakable, receiving in return a strange smile that barely tugged the corners of her mouth. As he walked toward his office, he noticed the movement in the glass conference room. Executives clustered around the table in animated conversation, their posture urgent. His heart thudded once, heavy and warning. He double-checked his calendar on his phone. The strategy sync he was supposed to lead was scheduled for 10. It was 9:45. He sped up, forcing himself not to run, the missing finger on his left hand pressing painfully into his palm where it curled in a tense fist. He reached the glass doors just as the laughter inside quieted, the eyes of the managers turning toward him, some startled, others smugly expectant. He paused at the threshold, taking in the slideshow already halfway through on the big screen. The graphs and bullet points he had prepared displayed without him. One of the senior VPs cleared his throat and gestured vaguely toward a chair, as if inviting a tardy student into class. Malachi felt heat rise up his neck, making the burned scar flush an ugly red. He entered slowly, each step an admission of failure, every eye in the room confirming what they wanted to see. He tried to smile, to apologize in a neutral, non-confrontational tone that made his accent even heavier. A few of them didn't bother to hide their exasperation. Someone clicked to the next slide before he even finished speaking. He forced himself to take a seat at the far corner, fingers drumming once, twice, before he stilled them on the cool surface of the table. He watched in silence as they dissected his proposal without him, trading knowing looks he wasn't invited to share. When it was over, no one waited for him to speak. They stood in unison, chairs scraping in a harsh chorus, already turning away, talking over him as he tried to offer clarifications. The room emptied quickly, leaving him alone with the humming projector. He closed the presentation file with mechanical precision, eyes burning as he blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears blur the screen. He packed up slowly, listening to the scattered laughter fading down the hall. Returning to his office was like walking toward a sentence he couldn't avoid. He noticed immediately that something had changed. The nameplate on the frosted glass door was gone. In its place was a small note in official HR font, taped at an angle. He peeled it off and read it twice, his eyes narrowing, then drifting toward the hallway where people pretended not to watch him. The note was simple. Please relocate to desk 14B, floor plan attached. No explanation beyond an administrative courtesy. He felt his breath catch. He forced himself to keep moving. He walked back through the floor with the folded paper in his hand, his missing finger making the edge slip until he gripped it tighter with his other hand. Around him, the quiet chatter of staff fell silent as he passed, picking up again in hushed tones once he was clear. He found desk 14B easily enough. It was impossible to miss. It was one of the handful of workstations arranged by the full-length windows facing the street. He needed it flawless. He clicked through the pages slowly, reviewing each table, his eyes dragging over the margins where he had made his notes in clear, spare language. He ran a spell check 3 times. He made sure his English was perfectly neutral, no slang that might trip him. When he finally hit send to the board's review list, he felt a moment of fragile relief that evaporated as soon as he sat back in the too small chair. He caught his reflection again, burned scar catching the pale light, foreign face marked and still. The day crawled forward. He tried not to notice how the managers gathered in the corridor by the printer, their eyes flicking to him, voices pitched just low enough to keep plausible deniability. He tried not to hear the snatches of laughter that died when he approached. At lunch, he ate at his desk again, unwrapping his sandwich with slow care so the paper wouldn't crinkle too loud. By mid-afternoon, his email pinged with a reply from the board secretary confirming receipt of his plan. He read the message 3 times, parsing each line for subtext. It was neutral, cold. He told himself that was fine. That was safe. It wasn't until he was packing to leave that he heard the first comment. He was shutting down his computer when a senior manager walked past on his way to the elevator, voice pitched too loud for a private remark. Someone else beside him asked about the plan, and he laughed, saying that apparently it was full of creative accounting, and that they would need to fix it if they didn't want to look stupid in front of investors. The words stabbed like glass under Malachi's skin. He froze, unable to react, not even when the group moved off, still laughing. He turned back to his screen, heart pounding in his ears, and reopened the plan file in a panic. He clicked through every page, checking totals and source notes. They were as he left them. He couldn't find a single mistake. He closed the laptop with shaking hands, feeling the burn scar tighten on his neck as heat rushed there. He forced himself to stand, to walk slowly so it wouldn't look like running. The next day was worse. He arrived early again, but this time found an email waiting for him marked urgent. It was from the board secretary, cool and formal. They'd received his plan, but it contained significant errors in the projections. Errors that were, they wrote, difficult to explain. They had asked the executive team to review and correct them before resubmission. He opened the attached file. His stomach dropped. The numbers were wrong, badly wrong. Totals that didn't add up. Sourcing costs doubled or halved at random. Notes deleted. It was his file name, his formatting, his notes in the margins. But not his work. He felt the blood drain from his face. He sat very still. His mind reeled, trying to understand how it had happened. He looked at the file history, but the internal system didn't track edits that way. Anyone with access could have opened it, changed it, saved over it. He scrolled through page after page of sabotage, his heart sinking lower with each wrong cell, each ruined line of projection. He closed it with a dry click, breathing through his nose to keep from making any sound. He emailed the board secretary an apology so stiff it read like a death notice, promising to correct everything immediately. He spent the next 6 hours rebuilding the plan from scratch at his desk by the window, aware of every glance that passed behind him, every shift and scrape of chair legs. No one offered help. No one asked what he was doing. When he stood to get coffee, he caught the murmur of voices cutting off as he walked by. Later that afternoon, he overheard it plainly. 2 managers in the break area, their voices dripping with condescension, talking about the board's frustration. One said that it was too bad, really, because he seemed smart, but you know how it is with people who don't get American culture. The other nodded sagely, adding that maybe communication was an issue they hadn't properly accounted for when they hired him. The words stuck to his skin like grease. He wanted to confront them. He wanted to yell, but he didn't. He couldn't. He remembered the cartoon on the slide, the laughter in the hallway, the meeting that had started without him. He stood in the corridor for a long moment, head down, scar burning, breath shallow, listening to them dissect his reputation in real time. This morning, he hoped to prove his usefulness all over again, praying the board would see his diligence. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the overhead lights were already blazing. He could hear voices, low and purposeful, coming from the direction of the main conference room. He walked carefully, fighting the urge to look through the glass walls where shadows moved behind the frosted logo, silhouettes leaning in conspiratorial closeness. He turned away before anyone could see him hesitate. Settling at his exposed desk by the window, he opened his email, rereading the board's clipped reply acknowledging receipt of the corrected plan without so much as a thank you. He tried to take comfort in their neutrality. Neutrality felt like safety. He made a list of tasks for the day, checking each one twice. He would make no mistakes. Around mid-morning, the building's hush cracked with the sound of laughter and footsteps as a group of well-dressed visitors in tailored coats and polished shoes strode down the hall. Behind one of the senior VPs, Malachi blinked, recognizing a major client contact whose signature was on 2 lucrative contracts. He felt his stomach drop. No one had mentioned a tour. The visitors stopped at several desks along the executive floor, shaking hands, trading jokes. He saw the VP glance toward him once, eyes flicking to the burn scar on his neck before steering the clients away without so much as an introduction. Malachi watched frozen as they paused 2 desks down to shake hands with a junior analyst who grinned in open surprise at the attention. He turned back to his screen, heart hammering, pretending to read the same line of a spreadsheet over and over until the text blurred. Minutes later, the group passed again, this time with the clients laughing at something the VP said, their eyes deliberately skipping past Malachi, as if he were furniture. The words burned in his ears, even though he couldn't hear them. When they turned the corner, He let his breath out in one ragged exhale, feeling heat pool in his scar. He closed his eyes, willing the rush of blood to stop. For the rest of the day, he heard snippets of conversation, excitement about the visit, congratulations about how well it had gone, people praising the VP's poise and preparation. Malachi forced himself not to react, nodding politely when someone accidentally spoke to him in passing before realizing who he was. By late afternoon, the building buzzed with energy about the upcoming company event, a casual happy hour to celebrate the successful client tour. He tried to beg off silently by keeping his head down, but his attendance was expected. An admin sent an invite with his name highlighted, so he went. The event was hosted in the gleaming lobby, the high ceilings echoing with laughter and the clink of glasses. Malachi hovered at the edge, clutching a small plastic cup of flat soda he hadn't sipped from. He smiled when people looked his way, but received only nods that were immediately followed by turnbacks. The senior managers stood in a tight circle, drinks held with confident ease, exchanging stories and inside jokes that Malachi wasn't close enough to hear. He could feel his accent thickening in his throat every time he considered trying to approach. He heard them laugh again, saw heads thrown back in unrestrained amusement. He found a corner, stood with perfect posture, willing himself invisible. Then a call came for a group photo to mark the event, a tradition, the admin announced, grinning wide for the camera as she tried to herd the managers together in front of the corporate logo. People moved eagerly, clustering in the best spots. Malachi tried to edge closer, waiting for a nod, an invitation, any gesture that he should join. None came. He hovered with one foot half raised, pulse beating wildly in his throat. The admin called out a joke about everyone needing to squeeze in tighter. Malachi felt a flicker of hope, but watched the group instead close ranks, turning shoulders to block him from view, pressing arms around one another in a show of camaraderie that excluded him completely. The camera flash went off. He caught the moment in painful detail. The wide, easy smiles, the casual slinging of arms over shoulders, the corporate banner perfectly framed behind them. He let his foot drop back to the floor. He set his cup on a nearby table he wasn't sure he was allowed to use and backed away quietly before anyone noticed. The rest of the evening blurred. He didn't speak to anyone. He smiled and nodded automatically when necessary, feeling his cheeks ache from the strain. He left as soon as the room's attention shifted to someone else, slipping away while they ordered another round. He caught the posted photo on the internal network the next morning. It sat on the front page of the company portal with a banner reading, "Celebrating our team spirit." The shot was perfectly lit, carefully cropped. Every manager present wore a toothy grin, faces tilted toward one another in pretend intimacy. Malachi wasn't in it at all. Not even his shoulder, not even the corner of his shoe. It was like he'd never been there. He sat at his new desk by the window, the screen reflecting the photo back at him, his own scarred face superimposed on the smiling group like a ghost. He didn't close the page. He didn't look away. He let it burn. His mind pulsed with the remembered heat of embarrassment every time he closed his eyes, the phantom itch of the scar on his neck flaring whenever he thought of the camera flash. But he had taught himself how to hide such things. He arrived before anyone else, flicked on the harsh overhead light, and methodically organized his space even though it was already tidy to the point of sterility. He reviewed his to-do list, revising his strategy proposal for the third time, determined to make sure no error, real or fabricated, could be found. He was determined to reclaim a shred of the authority they had stripped from him. When the floor began to fill with the usual low buzz of greetings and clacking shoes, he watched the senior managers sweep past him without so much as a nod, eyes skimming over his desk as if it were unoccupied. He ignored it, or he tried. He kept his eyes on the screen, clicking carefully through his work, telling himself professionalism was the answer, that they could not ignore the value of flawless performance. By mid-morning, the first sign of what was coming arrived in his inbox. A mass email sent from the Director of Operations marked new allocation effective immediately, populated with names and project titles. Malachi's eyes darted down the list, fingers trembling despite his effort to still them. He scrolled twice, scanning every project he'd led or contributed to, every contract he'd negotiated, every initiative he'd launched. His name wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere. Every major project had been assigned to someone else, people who had once reported to him, people who had avoided looking at him in the halls. No explanation, no note of reassignment. Just gone. His chest tightened as if a giant hand pressed it flat. He forced himself to exhale slowly through his nose, blinking back the sting in his eyes. He read it again, slower this time, looking for a mistake, something he had missed. The only thing he found was the line at the end thanking the team for their dedication and professionalism in this transition. Transition. The word twisted in his gut. Around him, the office hummed with restrained excitement. He heard chairs scraping closer together as colleagues traded comments about their new responsibilities and opportunities. A wave of laughter erupted from the corner where a group of managers compared notes on their expanded authority. No one spoke to him. No one offered sympathy. When he finally turned from the screen, his reflection in the window showed a man stiff as a statue, face pale except for the angry line of the scar glowing red against his collar. He remembered suddenly how it had felt when the burn was fresh, raw, screaming pain he had bitten down on because there was no one to help him. The memory felt too close. He stood slowly, pushing back the wobbly chair with deliberate care so it wouldn't scrape too loud, refusing to betray the tremor in his legs. He walked to the bathroom without looking at anyone, feeling every pair of eyes turn away with exaggerated indifference. Inside the stark, fluorescent-lit stall, he closed the door and pressed his palm flat to the cool metal, trying to calm his breathing. He didn't cry. He wouldn't. When he finally returned to his desk, there was a new addition to the office environment, a set of printed posters that hadn't been there before, brightly colored, branded with a corporate logo in bold letters. He paused halfway down the hall, reading the headline, Professional Communication, the Arcadia Standard. Beneath it, a large cartoon showed a series of do's and don'ts. The do side featured a clean-cut man in a suit with a friendly handshake, speech bubbles filled with polite, precise language. The don't side showed a caricature that made Malachi's stomach clench. It was drawn with ugly, heavy lines, mouth twisted into exaggerated shapes around broken words, letters jumbled to mimic incomprehensible speech. The figure's neck bore a bright red slash, a mocking echo of his burn scar. Its left hand was malformed, lines erased to suggest missing fingers. He felt his vision narrow to a pinprick. The noise of the office receded until it was just the beating of his own heart in his ears. He reached out once, fingertips brushing the glossy paper, confirming it was real before he dropped his hand quickly. He could feel eyes on him from nearby desks, furtive, watching, waiting. He didn't react. He forced his face into careful neutrality, pushing the scar on his neck deeper into his collar, as if that could erase it. He kept walking. At his desk, he sat mechanically, pulled open his inbox, and reread the allocation email. His name still missing. He answered a few trivial administrative notes in perfect, formal English, every word checked twice. He ignored the heat behind his eyes. For the rest of the day, he heard them talking around him, commenting on how the new allocations were more efficient, congratulating each other on getting things under control, praising the director of operations for seeing the big picture. He caught pieces of it, words that clung like burrs to his clothes. Cultural fit, communication issues, not ready for this level. He adjusted his coat, collar up against the lingering chill, then made his way to the elevator without sound. The doors closed with a pneumatic hiss, cutting him off from the world below. When they opened on the executive floor, he was met with silence so complete it rang in his ears. The lights had switched on automatically before his arrival, illuminating every reflective surface with harsh clarity. He moved through the floor deliberately, past the new posters that now hung in multiple spots, each one a cruel joke masquerading as training. He didn't look at them. He knew every line of the cartoon by heart now, could see the red slash on its cartoon neck in his sleep. At his exposed desk by the window, he set his bag down, took out his laptop, and logged in. He moved with the careful slowness of someone trying not to provoke an animal that had already bitten him. His fingers hovered over the keys, checking the meeting schedule once, then twice. The all hands was today mandatory attendance. His own name listed on the agenda for a 5-minute segment about strategy updates. A hollow spot opened in his chest at the thought. He reminded himself to breathe. Around 8, people began arriving, trickling past his desk with polite nods they didn't mean, sidelong glances they didn't hide. The chatter was subdued, anticipation hanging in the air. All hands days always did this, pulled people into shared spaces they couldn't avoid, forced them to perform a brittle sort of company unity. Malachi watched them go, letting the low rumble of conversation wash over him without moving. When it was time, he stood slowly, checking his collar to make sure it covered the worst of the burn scar, running a thumb over the fabric until it lay flat. He forced his left hand, with its missing finger, into his pocket so no one would see the stump. He picked up his notes he didn't need but clutched like armor, and walked toward the big conference room. The glass walls made him feel like he was walking into an aquarium. Rows of chairs were already filled with staff, mid-level managers. The senior leadership clustered in the back in their usual loose phalanx of tailored suits and practiced expressions. He slipped in through the side door and hovered at the edge, waiting for his turn. He watched the director of operations speak with smooth, easy command, gesturing confidently to the branded slides behind him, drawing laughter at prepared jokes that fell from his tongue with rehearsed charm. When he finished, the polite applause was automatic. The director gestured toward Malachi without even looking at him, voice still ringing with false cheer as he said the next segment was strategy updates. Malachi's name didn't pass his lips. Malachi walked forward carefully, clutching his notes so tightly they bent and creased under his fingers. He stopped in front of the group, feeling the bright LED light overhead illuminate every angle of his face, the red slash of his burned scar catching like neon in photos. He cleared his throat softly, voice cracking once before he forced it steady. He began speaking, outlining targets and deliverables, the language precise and dry. He'd memorized every word, refused to ad-lib even one sentence. He didn't want to give them anything they could twist. As he spoke, his eyes drifted to the back of the room. The senior managers were watching him with cool, fixed attention, arms folded across their chests in perfect synchrony. One shifted dramatically, sighing in a way that cut through his words like a blade. Another shook his head slowly, deliberately. A third let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if disappointed in a child. One by one, they mirrored the movement, arms folding tighter, chins dipping, eyes narrowing in unison. The effect was theatrical, calculated, impossible to ignore. Murmurs rose in the room as staff noticed, some coughing awkwardly, others sinking lower in their chairs. Malachi felt his pulse in his teeth. He faltered once, reading the same line twice before catching himself. He forced his voice steady again, cheeks flaming, the burn scar prickling as sweat gathered under his collar. He finished the segment on time, nodded once with the stiffness of a man snapping his own neck, and turned to leave the front of the room. The silence behind him wasn't respectful. It was suffocating. When he sat down in the last row, he kept his gaze locked on his ruined notes, the paper trembling once before he flattened it against his knee. He did not look up. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of their eyes on the back of his neck, the smirk of victory pulling at their mouths. The meeting continued. When he stepped onto the executive floor, the lights were already on, casting that bright, unforgiving clarity over every glass wall and polished surface. He set his bag down at the narrow window desk that was still his, though now even that felt conditional, and sat without removing his coat at first, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. He thought of the HR email from the day before, with its careful weaponized neutrality, and the words about intimidating expressions that turned his scar and silence into evidence of threat. He had not replied. He had only closed it, logging off in the dark while the office lights died behind him. He rubbed his fingers over the scar absently now, feeling its twisted ridge like a rope burn he could never soothe. He forced himself to boot the computer, eyes scanning the calendar for the day. Nothing new, nothing for him. The projects he had once run were still gone. The meetings carried on without him. Even the people in the open floor didn't try to hide their aversion anymore. They talked openly, confidently, as though his presence was invisible, no longer a threat to be contained, but a non-entity to be ignored. He heard the muffled laughter from one of the private offices, the director's voice unmistakable even through the door, smooth and practiced, telling some story that brought a roar of approval from the others. Malachi swallowed against the dryness in his throat, blinking slowly at the blinking cursor on his screen. He had no new assignments, no new tasks. He closed his inbox after checking it twice just to be sure, then opened the shared company portal. The photo from the event was still pinned to the top, celebrating our team spirit, showing every beaming face in high-resolution detail. He studied it, finding the space where he should have been, where he had tried to hover at the edge, waiting for permission to join. There was no trace of him. They had angled the shot to ensure it. He shut it quickly, heart thumping. He thought about leaving, just standing up and walking out, maybe going home and never returning, disappearing into a city that wouldn't know him or ask about his accent or stare at his missing finger or flinch from his scar. But he didn't. Instead, he sat and waited. He waited until the office filled. Waited until the meeting invites flew around in rapid pings he was never included on. Waited until the director himself strode past on the way to another unannounced client visit, nodding at everyone except him. Malachi sat still as stone, breathing slowly. Around 10:30, he stood up, leaving his laptop open on the desk, its screen slowly dimming into energy saver mode behind him. He walked down the main hall slowly, letting the overhead lights track his movement. He felt the eyes that flicked toward him and then away. He turned toward the large glass conference room, where several senior managers sat talking animatedly, all laughter and easy camaraderie. He didn't enter. Instead, he paused in the doorway, observing them quietly for a few seconds. When the director finally noticed him, the laughter died. Conversation fell into tense silence, punctuated only by the squeak of a chair leg. Malachi didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at them one by one, his face utterly blank, the scar on his neck more visible than ever in the overhead light. When the director cleared his throat and asked if he needed something, Malachi didn't answer. He turned on his heel and walked away, his shoes clicking sharply on the polished floor, echoing back at the table he'd left silent behind him. He went straight to the CEO's suite, his suite, the one they had taken from him. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and entered slowly. The air was stale from disuse. Dust had settled on the polished wood of a desk he used to sit behind. The nameplate was gone. The lights were dimmer in here, as if no one bothered to check the bulbs anymore. Malachi stood in the center of the room and looked around for a long time, letting the silence fill his ears until the thumping of his heart was the only sound. He set his bag down on the desk slowly, deliberately. He unzipped it and removed a single folder, thick, creased at the corners, held closed with a broad elastic band. He placed it dead center on the desk and tapped it once with his finger. Then he sat in the chair behind the desk, the leather creaking in protest after so long. He let his head fall back for a moment, exhaling heavily. When he opened his eyes, he focused on the folder, his expression unchanging. Inside it were records, emails he had printed out, copies of the meeting schedules changed at the last minute, screen captures of edits made to his project plan under other logins. The hush spread outward in a ripple, conversations fading under the harsh fluorescent lights. He didn't look at anyone directly, but he saw them all. The hurried shifting of papers, the sudden interest in screens, the deliberate avoidance of his path. The cartoonish posters about professional communication still hung on the walls, their colors bright, their message grotesque. He didn't spare them a glance. He walked straight to his exposed desk, set down his bag, and removed the folder with careful precision. The battered elastic snapped lightly as he peeled it away, revealing the stack of neatly organized documents inside. He didn't sit. He left the folder open on the desk for a moment, letting his eyes trace the contents one last time. The printed emails, the falsified schedules, the altered project plans, the photos of the mocking poster, the HR reprimand accusing him of intimidating behavior for simply existing with his scar and silence. Every piece of evidence that said this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was policy. It was culture. He closed the folder gently, pressed the elastic back over it, and picked it up. He didn't rush. He walked slowly down the hall, the silence around him thick enough to choke. He heard chairs creak as people shifted to watch. No one spoke. No one dared. He reached the large glass conference room where the senior managers had gathered for their usual morning sync. He didn't knock. He opened the door and stepped inside, his shoes thudding against the polished floor. Conversation died instantly. Every head turned, expressions freezing into that strained, polite neutrality that barely disguised the flicker of irritation, the rolling eyes waiting to happen. The director of operations straightened in his chair, eyebrows lifting in carefully measured surprise, his mouth forming a greeting that didn't make it past his teeth. Malachi didn't wait for permission. He walked to the center of the room and set the folder down on the table, the elastic rolling away and bouncing once before falling silent. The pages spread slightly, revealing their damning contents to anyone looking. He didn't say a word. He stood with his hands resting on the table edge, fingers splayed, the missing one a glaring absence in the bright light. The scar on his neck gleamed pale and unmistakable, a memory of fire that refused to fade. The director cleared his throat, trying to reassert control, voice dripping false calm as he asked what this was about. Malachi didn't answer. He only pushed the folder gently, sliding it toward the director until the man had no choice but to put a hand on it to stop it from falling off the table. The other managers watched, eyes flicking from the folder to Malachi's face and back again, discomfort squirming under their skin. Malachi's expression didn't change. He stood like carved stone, silent, letting the weight of the evidence speak for him. Someone coughed, a short, nervous bark that fell flat in the hush. One of the VPs leaned forward to see the top page, a high-resolution photo of the mocking poster with the caricatured foreigner and the slashed neck. The silence deepened. Pages turned slowly under tentative fingers, revealing emails with his name on the to-line, instructions to move meetings without informing him, edits to his proposal files from unauthorized logins. Another photo showed his name scrubbed from the team allocation chart, the word reassigned stamped in red over projects he had built from scratch. There was the HR email, accusing him of intimidating expressions, its language careful and clinical, devoid of empathy. The director's face reddened in patches, his mouth opening and closing without words. He tried to frame an objection, a defense, but the proof lay before him in black and white. Malachi didn't look at him. He didn't look at any of them. His eyes drifted over their heads to the far wall, unfocused, as if he were seeing through them to something they would never understand. When the director finally managed to stammer a question, asking what exactly Malachi expected to accomplish, he didn't respond. He only reached into his pocket and produced a second, smaller folder, this one newer, crisp, marked with the company's logo. He dropped it onto the first folder with a dull smack. This one held the legal documentation he had spent the last week assembling in secret meetings with the board's external counsel, the details of the company's anti-discrimination policies, the signed shareholder statements granting him temporary executive authority to investigate and restructure. The room went even quieter, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. The director's face drained of color as he flipped it open, reading the legal jargon, seeing his own name highlighted in sections outlining recommended disciplinary action pending formal investigation. Other managers shifted in their chairs, eyes wide and unblinking. The carefully cultivated smugness they wore like armor cracked and fell away. One tried to speak, voice catching, but no one backed him up. Malachi didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't even breathe heavily. He stood perfectly still, watching them read. Not after yesterday's meeting, when he had laid every page of evidence on the table, forcing them to see their own ugliness in black and white. He watched them arrive in clumps, their conversations hushed and disjointed, eyes darting toward his desk before skittering away. The laughter that usually punctuated these early hours was gone. In its place was a tense, coiled silence. No one greeted him. No one dared. The director of operations came in late, his tie loose, hair slightly disordered in a way it never had been before. He didn't look at Malachi. He didn't look at anyone. He went straight to his office and closed the door too hard, the click echoing down the hall like a shot. Malachi watched the door swing in its frame for a second, then stilled. He blinked slowly, the only sign of reaction. He turned back to his screen. On it, the invite for the company-wide meeting pulsed in his inbox, bright and unignorable. Mandatory attendance. No subject line. No agenda. Just his signature at the bottom, black and crisp. He had sent it before leaving the building last night, walking the silent halls with that folder clutched to his side like a shield. At exactly 9 o'clock, his calendar reminder pinged. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, ran a hand once over his collar to smooth it over the scar. He picked up the folder, thinner now, its contents carefully curated, and walked without hurry to the big glass conference room. He pushed the door open and entered without a word. The room was already filled, chairs arranged in haphazard rows, employees from every department squeezed together in polite discomfort. The senior managers sat at the back, as far from the front as they could manage without leaving altogether. Their expressions were pinched, resigned, but defiant in small, mean ways, crossed arms, legs thrust out, jaws set tight. Malachi didn't acknowledge them. He walked to the front of the room and set the folder down on the table beside him, fingers resting on it lightly. He scanned the faces turned toward him, row upon row of them, wide-eyed and expectant, some guilty, some curious, some blank with fear of being noticed. He took a breath. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't adjust his tie. He spoke. His voice was low, but even every word enunciated with the slow precision of a man who had spent years making sure he was understood despite the accent that clung to him like a second skin. He explained what he had found: the sabotage of his work, the exclusion from meetings, the false reassignment of projects, the mocking poster that made a caricature of his face, his scar, his missing finger, and his voice. He described the HR reprimand that had blamed him for making people uncomfortable simply by existing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He let the words sink in, slow and suffocating. The silence in the room grew deeper with every sentence. He watched shoulders hunch, eyes drop. A few people swallowed hard enough to be heard. When he was finished, he opened the folder and began laying the evidence on the table one page at a time. He held them up for everyone to see. The emails, the meeting schedules altered without notice, the edits to his proposal that introduced deliberate errors, the photograph of the poster, bright and undeniable, the HR email in perfect corporate prose, cold as ice. He spoke no further as he moved through them, letting the rustle of paper and the collective breathing of the room carry the weight. When he was done, he straightened and let the silence grow until it felt like the air itself had thickened, refusing to move. Then he turned, picked up the final document, a letter on official company letterhead, bearing signatures from the board. He read it aloud in that same steady, quiet voice, explaining the new authority granted to him to restructure the department as he saw fit, pending formal investigation of harassment and discrimination claims. The words fell like stones into a pond, sending ripples through the sea of stunned faces. The managers at the back finally moved. One shifted forward in his chair, mouth opening in protest, but no sound came out. Another stared at the floor, red creeping up his neck to the tips of his ears. The director closed his eyes, face pale and sweaty, fingers flexing uselessly on his knee. Malachi lowered the letter slowly, watching them without blinking. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just existed there, solid and silent and undeniable. He told them the process would begin immediately. He named names. He read out the list of people who would be placed on immediate leave pending investigation, their faces draining of color as they heard themselves called out in front of the entire company. He informed them that security staff were waiting outside the room to escort them out. He watched the movement in the back, the way some scrambled to stand, trying to argue, their words stuttering and dying under the weight of the evidence arrayed on the table. Security appeared in the doorway, large and implacable, their dark uniforms absorbing the light. The managers resisted in small, pathetic ways, shouts that turned to pleas, half-formed accusations that died in their throats when no one backed them up. One tried to push past a guard and was gently but firmly guided back. Another burst into furious tears. Malachi didn't flinch. He simply watched them go, eyes following each movement with that same unreadable calm. The employees who remained sat frozen, no one daring to look directly at him, their faces pale in the harsh overhead lights. They were part of him, part of the truth he had forced them all to see. He passed clusters of employees who had spilled from the conference room, their hushed voices thick with uncertainty, their eyes averted or glued to him with new wariness. The conversations faltered as he approached, people stepping aside to give him a wide berth. He did not speak to them. He offered no nods of acknowledgement. He simply walked on, calm and steady, refusing to shrink. When he reached his desk by the window, he set the folder down and pulled his chair out with a quiet scrape. He sat and powered on his laptop. The machine booted up with its usual fan whine and welcome chime, incongruously cheerful. He logged in, the familiar desktop greeting him, icons arranged with obsessive neatness. But the inbox was different now. Pings arrived one by one, HR alerts, system notifications of account lockouts for the terminated managers, automated approvals for access removal. The company's internal network flickered with changes as names disappeared from the org chart. As he watched, the header image on the staff portal changed. The photo from the event, the one that had cut him out entirely, was gone, replaced by a neutral placeholder. No smiling faces, no forced camaraderie, just a logo and the company's mission statement in stark black and white. He closed the browser slowly. A soft chime drew his eye to a new message, marked urgent. It was from the board. They thanked him for his thorough documentation. They affirmed their support for the restructuring. They reminded him of his temporary executive authority to enact whatever policies he deemed necessary to prevent such discrimination from ever happening again. They would schedule a follow-up in a week to discuss next steps, but for now the responsibility was his. Malachi read the message 3 times, ensuring he understood every carefully crafted line. Then he closed it and opened a blank email. He addressed it to all staff. He wrote in clear, formal language that Arcadia Holdings would be implementing a zero-tolerance anti-discrimination policy effective immediately. He outlined mandatory training, new reporting procedures, an independent review board with the power to investigate any complaint without interference from management. He detailed the consequences for violation in unflinching terms: termination without severance, loss of reference, blacklisting within partner networks. There would be no appeals for repeat offenders. He signed it with his name and new title, Interim Chief Executive Officer. He read it twice, then sent it. He watched the mail client sink, the message sailing out into the company's veins like a shot of medicine, harsh but necessary. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Outside the window, the city had brightened to full day, cars moving in orderly lines, pedestrians bundled against the cold but purposeful in their stride. He studied them for a moment, seeing himself in their stubborn progress, their refusal to stop. Around him, the office was not quiet. He could hear the anxious chatter picking up as people read his email. He heard doors opening and closing, chairs scraping as employees shifted in their seats, voices lowered in hurried consultations. He didn't turn to look. He knew what was happening. They were reckoning with what they'd ignored, what they'd enabled. He let them. He turned back to his screen and began drafting the new training materials. Every line was simple, unambiguous, no room for misinterpretation. He listed real-world scenarios, consequences, appeal procedures. He included anonymous reporting channels. He wrote as someone who knew exactly what kind of cruelty people were capable of, and exactly how carefully they try to hide it behind polite smiles and corporate platitudes. He worked methodically, fingers flying over the keys despite the missing digit. The scar on his neck tightened and loosened as he swallowed, eyes flicking to the reflection in the glass, just long enough to see the burn gleaming pale. He did not shy away. When a junior analyst approached slowly, hovering 2 desks away with a tentative question about next steps, he paused his typing and gestured for them to come closer. He answered in a voice that was low but clear, every syllable careful but sure. The analyst nodded quickly, relief blooming in their eyes before they retreated to relay the message. Others followed throughout the afternoon, trickling toward him in 1s and 2s. Questions about workflow, approvals, policies. He answered each one. Calm, direct, no anger, no apology. He watched them listen, watched them nod, watched the tension begin to ease as they realized he wasn't going anywhere. By the end of the day, the office was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Not the conspiratorial, gleeful malice that had marked it for months, but something wary, chastened, raw. People kept glancing at the posters on the walls, realizing what they meant now, some reddening with embarrassment, others quietly taking them down without a word. Malachi let them. He didn't help. He didn't interfere. He just watched. When the sun finally set and the lights of the city lit up like a field of stars, he powered down his laptop, gathered his folder, and stood. He walked the length of the office one last time, passing empty desks where certain managers would never sit again. He paused once at the glass wall, seeing his reflection in the dark outside layered over the office behind him. The burn scar, the missing finger, the plain navy suit. He met his own gaze without flinching. He turned and walked out without a sound. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew the work had only begun. But for the first time, it was his to do. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot so far. Did it surprise you, move you, make you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Let's connect down there.